This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then notes on resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month.
There's pros and cons to everything, right? The pros are certainly, we've talked about how it's actually improved access to healthcare for so many different people. Otherwise, you just don't have access. Think about, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about remote employees, remote. It's actually been a big plus there. There are cons in terms of sometimes you say there's so many different apps. You almost add to your stress level if you say, I want to be part of like 6 different things as such.
Hello, and welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky, and today we have an episode in our series on technology and well-being, and my guest is Ameeta Soni. She drives growth for technology and digital health companies as a chief marketing officer, a growth advisor, an investor, and a board director. She's a strong believer in leveraging digital technologies to drive long-term value. And we talked about trends in digital technology for health and well-being and how it has been truly transformational for healthcare. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Hi, Ameeta. I'm so excited to be talking to you on the podcast today. Thank you for being here. So before we get into the topic of the day, the question I ask all my guests, if you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why?
You know, this question seems somewhat unrelated, but it's actually very relevant to our discussion. I would love to have dinner with Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, his genius just spanned so many different things, everything from art to science to engineering and anatomy. A conversation with him would be incredibly enriching, offering a lot of creative insights into innovation and the Renaissance period.
Yes, absolutely. Count me in as a guest if you're inviting guests for that one. That would be amazing. Well, Ameeta, we are talking about technology and well-being. I think a subject actually he would find quite interesting. Just to get started, like what are you seeing today in terms of trends regarding technology and well-being?
Increasingly, certainly seeing with this whole explosion of digital in terms of digital addressing health needs, not just physical, but really mental and emotional well-being as well. And I'm seeing that both in terms of individuals, their interactions with clinicians, and very much in the workplaces. Employers are trying to see how they can help promote the well-being for their employees.
Yes. How do you think that's going? How do you think that workplaces are using technology to better someone's mental or emotional health?
So I think it's in a few different ways. One is things we take for granted, some of these tools in an office setting, which facilitate work so people can get done more within a certain period of time and just have a better life, quality of life as such. It could be things like Microsoft Teams and Slack, which we take for granted. It's the collaboration tools which just make things easier. It's note takers. Like I use them all the time. The AI note takers for meetings, which, get those transcripts, summarize things for you and action items. It's such a big time saver. So that's a big plus. Of course, as a caveat, you do want to make sure sure you tell people you're in a meeting with that you want to use them and get there okay with that. But another one is I find very useful is the online peer groups. It's like whether it's getting information or access to other vendors, or it's just that someone has worked with them already and done part of the work for you. And it's trusted and vetted as such, right? So, of course, everyone has to see what's right for them. But being able to use technology in terms of, and again, doing it online versus just physically having all these meetings or things would just take up so much time that it just makes it so much easier to do it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you talked about some productivity tools in there, things that are helping us in our work. But how are we making sure that these kind of advancements are actually helping us with our mental health or our well-being versus just giving us one more thing to do?
And I think some of that is being very conscious as to how we use them. And in anything we do, to make sure that one is not just wrapped up in work, but there is downtime associated with that as well, right? And I have to be honest up front and say, I haven't totally nailed this, but I am very conscious of it though. And I think what it helps is just to have set aside, boundaries. And there's no one size fits all. It's different for different people. But being able to separate work and home or personal stuff is a big deal. And I don't mean it has to be totally that you don't do any digital at all. I mean, I love to read on my Kindle. I'm a big Duolingo fan. So it's like, but it's a break from work, right? Do you see what I'm saying? So it's then again, there are people who say, I'm done at 5 and I'll see you at 8:30 or 9 in the morning. And there are others, me included, who find it actually less stressful at the end of the day, whether it was a work day or just preparing at night before going to bed. I have things laid out. What are the most important things for me next day? So it's less stressful for me. It's not going to take a huge amount of time, but it just puts me in that zone.
Yes. And what you're talking about is that we need to be paying attention to how we're using the technology, not just blindly jumping in with these things. And I will tell you that I sometimes use AI to brainstorm ideas, and sometimes that's beneficial for my mental health. But when it seems to go off the reservation and say something that doesn't make sense, then that turns out not to be great for my mental health.
And I think part of it is, again, I found it actually very useful. But the way I look at it is, in a way, it's doing some of the research work for me, pulling things together. But it is up to me and my expertise and what to say. Okay, as I look at this is great. I can build on it some more, right? Or this doesn't make sense to me at all. Maybe it's in a different context. That AI agent isn't as smart as it should be. But nevertheless, I have found it to be so very useful in terms of being able to use some of these tools as such.
Yes, I agree for the most part. And American employers are increasingly leveraging these kind of productivity tools, but also digital tools to promote employee health and well-being. So what are some that you think are working well?
So, it's interesting because some of it is the employers have seen that the workforce wellness programs really help both with the employee mental health as well as the productivity. But increasingly, as digital health solutions address both physical and mental health, they're also hearing from their employees that these digital solutions are actually very convenient for them, especially when it comes to mental health, because one of the biggest challenges, and I'm here in the Boston area, just like you, Manya, for mental health, it is virtually impossible for people to get in-person appointments with therapists at any reasonable time.
Yes.
And you absolutely do need in-person appointments for more serious issues. For stress and anxiety, it is more important for people to be able to connect to someone right away instead of having to wait months and months. And having access via these digital solutions to people who can help them is a big deal. It is easy to use, it's convenient, it's anonymous, and people can do it at their own time, including late at night. So that's a big plus. And I think that's what employers are realizing, that it's a whole range, whether it's mindfulness apps or providing these kind of resources for conversations. They are clinicians, but it's in a different setting as such. It's a big plus for the employees.
Absolutely. Well, as we're looking at these kind of tools, how can we make sure that digital health initiatives are inclusive and accessible?
So a few different things. Of course, you want to make sure that they are designed to work for people of all abilities, right? So it needs to be from a design or user friendliness perspective, address that. It needs to make sure that it's for people at different level of digital savviness as such, right? Not everybody can up there in terms of their digital expertise, but also being able to provide it across platforms. It's not just that you have to be wedded to your laptop. You can do it off your phone. You can do it off a tablet, right? You could even do it offline. So all of those things just make it easier for people in terms of accessibility for this.
Right. Absolutely. So we know that these digital tools can be a really valuable asset when we're thinking about well-being, but we know that it's more than just data. How can organizations create a holistic approach, uses these digital tools, but doesn't rely exclusively on them?
I think part of it is as organizations are looking to encourage employees to use them as well, because people also have at the back of their mind, is it a big brother thing? I want to make sure, how is this data going to be used? Companies absolutely have to make sure that they say this is a voluntary program. It is designed to improve, help the employees per se. And they are protected. Their data is protected it's in compliance with the data protection regulations as such, right? It's not being used for any other ulterior motive or people keeping track on what's going on for them. So those are some of the things which get people in sync with using some of these tools.
Yes, especially when you're talking about something mental health related. I think there's a lot of fear that data will be used against us.
Absolutely. And it's all health thing. It's like, even if it wasn't mental health, if someone had other chronic diseases, how would that be used against me? Would I get a promotion on that? But unfortunately, mental health is even more so of a stigma. Even in the US, we think we're such an advanced society, but it still holds a stigma. It's gotten better, but it still is. So people are very, very conscious of that. I totally get it. And I'm glad to be here in the US where we do have some pretty strong regulations about health data.
Absolutely. You mentioned chronic conditions. How is technology helping people manage those kind of chronic conditions?
Actually, in a lot of different ways. And it's interesting. Some of the applications one sees apps are for all chronic conditions, not just one particular therapeutic areas, and others are more specific. And, things like it's become to the stage now where even cancer has become a chronic condition, not necessarily like in a good way. It's positive that people aren't just saying, I only have one year to live. It's like, how do you manage that? And just being able to, some of these apps are actually coaching people through their, from a life perspective, whether it's from a diet point of view or acting as a concierge in terms of medications and appointments and stuff to keep making sure that they're keeping up with things. And then there's the other thing. I'm going to go back to the mental health aspect of it. Sometimes when people have chronic conditions, besides the physical health aspect of it, it can be depressing. And it can, from a mental health perspective. And especially as one sees that more with people who are housebound and may not have family or friends close by, that loneliness and the depression, it's just a big issue which needs to be dealt with. And that's where these apps and providing that online digital access to, it's not even therapists. It can just be peer support groups or online friends as such, someone to talk to. It just helps alleviate that. And it's actually been proven scientifically. It's not just people saying it.
Yes. And you've mentioned peers a couple of times, and that is such a valuable tool that I think we don't always think about, especially mental health. I think we often think of clinicians or mindfulness.
Yeah.
But I feel peers are in that middle ground where it's so important to talk to somebody who's had a similar experience to you. And I love that there are tools that enable that.
Yeah. I think it really is very fascinating to see how technology has actually enabled or facilitated so many different ways to approach healthcare. I'm just very passionate about it.
Yes, I know. I know you are. And I think back 10 years ago, more than that, to back when I was a kid, and how different the landscape of healthcare and well-being is these days because of technology.
Yeah, yeah. And, and it's not perfect yet. So I don't want to give the impression that we've gotten everything right, but it is such a step in the right direction. And it's evolving. We are mindful of what issues need to be addressed further, but it's just helped so many people already in so many different ways.
I want to circle back to the topic of privacy, right? I don't know about you, but every once in a while I get an email or a letter in the mail that says my data has been exposed as part of some breach, and here's the following things that I can do about it. As our technologies are advancing and becoming more sophisticated and knowing even more personal things about us, how can we make sure, as an organization who's wanting to use this technology, how can we make sure that it's protecting our privacy and it aligns with our ethical principles?
I think all companies, especially in this day and age, are very conscious of, of course, if it's healthcare, the need for the maintaining the privacy of that data, but also trying to protect as much as possible against cyber attacks as such. Mm-hmm. That said, Manya, I wish I could say that we've got that problem like such. We don't. Unfortunately, we're really right now in a situation where there are bad actors out there who are carrying out these cyber attacks as such. And I think all we can say is companies just have to be on top of it and put in the resources and be cognizant of the fact that that's going on there. And they, especially when dealing with health data, they have an additional responsibility, right? I mean, in the sense, if somebody knows I bought something from Staples, it's okay. It's not the end of the world, right? So,
right.
but it's just being more conscious of it, and even beyond the financial aspect of it, because it's so personal for people. So I think that, whether it's hospitals and health systems, and unfortunately, just even in the last year, we have seen cyber attacks across different healthcare organizations as such. So it's not all set yet, but unfortunately.
Well, you mentioned there are controls, and especially if we're thinking about medical information, I imagine that there's some threshold for which HIPAA applies, that we have to be careful about sharing medical data. But some of these apps probably don't have to comply with HIPAA regulations. And it just occurred to me, is that something we should be concerned about as users or companies?
Absolutely. And I think that is, again, as you were saying, like when there's technology, it's up to us how we use it. So even when we sign up for using some of these apps, it's up to us, just as before we give our credit card for any, you want to make sure, is this a legitimate organization that I'm talking about? It's worth just checking. I mean, do they have something on their website talking about how they handle patient privacy or in terms of adherence to HIPAA standards and other things? And again, there's a little bit of a gray line. If someone may not be a patient in a clinician perspective, but it's more overall health and well-being as such. Nevertheless, I would, even if it's a bit of an overkill, I would still want to just check out and see what they say about it.
Right. And as an employer, if this is something you're purchasing for your teams, you're definitely going to want to be on top of that information. So what do you see as some of the challenges as we're looking at this world of digital health?
It's interesting. There's pros and cons to everything, right? The pros are certainly, we've talked about how it's actually improved access to healthcare for so many different people. Otherwise, they just don't have access. We're talking about mental health. We're talking about remote employees, remote people as such. So it's actually been a big plus there. There are cons in terms of sometimes you say there's so many different apps. You almost add to your stress level if you say, I want to be part of like 6 different things as such, right? You almost have to pick and choose and say, hey, do you want something? Can you handle it by yourself? Do you want something? And if so, is one good enough? You don't have to do 6, right? I mean, it's like, because that adds its own thing. Who has the time to deal with so many things? So.
Yes. I always feel like, oh, that's a great app. Oh, that one's cool too. Can I have one that just does all of them? And then I realize, oh, that's my brain, actually. I do have that app.
So true, so true.
What is giving you hope these days as you think about digital health and these technologies?
I think the biggest thing for me is always makes me think back to it has really allowed so many people who didn't have access to healthcare for a variety of different reasons. It has improved their access so much. And that's a big plus. Whether we're talking of people who are based remotely, whether we're talking of people who didn't have access to mental health to go see therapists because they couldn't get appointments, or just because it was too much of a lift for people to do it otherwise. This way, less of a barrier to say, okay, have an app, I can do something. So it's all a step in the right direction, I think. And like everything else, you see the ups and downs, but I think just the fact that you're seeing this, and again, they're addressing it by different therapeutics as such, right? And I mean, we've seen huge influx in terms of being able to use AI to help with the pattern recognition and the diagnostics, right, from an imaging point of view. So that's been a huge plus.
So you mentioned that expanded access, which is great. Do you think with all these digital health tools and the wellness tools that we're seeing, that it's making a difference in our overall health?
We still have to get more data in on that, right? So, but I think the other part of it, which is certainly very encouraging, is because also people need to get, the business models have to work, right? People need to get paid as well. So we're increasingly seeing also some of the reimbursement codes come out for treatment, some of these.
Oh, okay.
Which is very helpful, right? I mean, like we were talking about how the treatment for chronic diseases from a mental health perspective and things for that. So that is certainly is reimbursable now. So that helps because companies need to make money too. The model has to work, right? So.
Yes. I appreciate that perspective because the app is only going to be as good as the developers and the research and development they want to put into it.
Either people pay on their own, if it's enough of this. And I think we have change in the US. Like 10 years ago, the model was, I'm not paying anything on my own. I better get covered by my insurance. Now, maybe because the people pay for so many other apps, whether it's for sports or this or that, whatever, that they're used to paying a certain amount. Either self-pay or if it's a bigger lift, you have some kind of a insurance reimbursement perspective in there as well, even if it's copay model or something. Or you have the employer option where things are covered through that as well.
Yes, absolutely. So is there anything I didn't ask you as we're thinking about digital health tools that you really wish I had asked you?
Actually, I think you covered a lot in the short time that we had together. I think we covered a lot. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time. Ameeta, tell us our listeners how they can reach you and learn more about you and your work.
I think probably the best way to reach me is via my LinkedIn. Always current. So it's just my name. So LinkedIn and Ameeta Soni. So that's the best way to reach me.
Excellent. Well, I will put a link to that in the show notes. And Ameeta, thank you so much. It was great to talk to you. And I'm so glad that our work has aligned on this topic.
Great to see you, Anya.
Thank you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. So if you'd like to learn more about me, Manya Chilinsky, I work with organizations to help understand how to create environments where people can thrive after difficult life experiences. And I do this through talks and consulting. I'm a survivor of mass violence, and I use my experience to help leaders learn about resiliency, compassion, and trauma-sensitive leadership, to build strategies to enable teams to thrive and be engaged amidst difficulty and turmoil. If this is something you want to learn more about, visit my website, www.manyachilinsky.com, or email me at manya@manyachilinsky, or stop by my social media on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much.